But the miracle of cinema is that it has the possibility in its use to actually think being, okay? And that makes it, at its most exalted, capable of doing the work of philosophy itself.
Well, hello everybody, and welcome once again to the deep magic of the basement library for one of our now almost weekly Friday live streams. And as a special treat, we have 2 weeks straight of conversations with interesting people. So I'm very happy to introduce and have Reno Lauro, a little short story on my part before we start, before Reno can introduce himself. But Reno and I met very briefly, but immediately there was a clear sense of kinship and common interest. So when I made a kind of flippant remark on the internet about the prevalence and strange virality of the AI generated Wes Anderson parodies, in particular about the Lord of the Rings one, I thought it would be an easy score on Facebook to get people to say a bunch of people to get to say a bunch of nasty things. And then there goes Reno being absolutely serious and telling me, no, actually, I think this would work. Normally, I would say something nasty and say, get out of here. No, this is ridiculous. What are you talking about? But something about the way Reno said it made me think, and I thought, aha. Here's an opportunity to have
just seemed a lot
Richard turn your sound off. Thank you. I thought this is an excellent opportunity to have Reno on in our little Patreon community to talk exactly about this. Why does he think this is such a good idea? But in the process, Reno, who is as I have come to know, a true cinephile, the conversation is going to be more wide-ranging than simply that, and I'm actually very excited because he sent me a bunch of stuff to read about the art of cinematography, and I really started to see the whole thing in a different way, and it's only the beginning of what I think is going to be a very interesting journey for myself, and I'd like to welcome you all into it. So Reno, after that very tortured and long intro, please tell us a little bit about yourself.
No, that's wonderful. Thank you so much for having me on. I did my PhD at the University of St. Andrews, the Institute for Theology and Imagination and the Arts. This was before I became Orthodox, actually, and before I met my wife. But I wrote on Tolkien's philosophy of mythopoeia as a response to an age of hyperreality. Cool. And in the midst of writing this labored dissertation, which is unpublished, but some portions are published, I actually spent the better part of 2 years working for Terrence Malick on the Palme d'Or winning film, The Tree of Life.
Oh my goodness. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Wow.
And it absolutely changed my life and my reading of most things, including Tolkien.
Wow.
In many ways. I had made some short films before going the academic route. I had shot a music video for a local band in Austin, and it was something that I wanted to do. But I was also drawn to these films, these thinking films, right? And what is going on in these thinking films that sets them apart from an Arnold Schwarzenegger film, or a melodrama. Not that there isn't a place in the world for things like this, but something else is happening, right? So that's essentially what the lens that I'm bringing to the table. And so when you mentioned that, yeah, it was maybe not so much seriousness, but sincerity. That wait a second, there's something at work, principally because, like everyone, I was very excited about the Peter Jackson films, which are now, I can hardly even believe that these words come off my lips, but 20 years ago,
I know, isn't that crazy?
right? 20 plus years ago now. I love them, but there was some distance between what was real in those films and what was true in Tolkien's works, right? And now the question is, when it comes to cinema, and what I'm going to talk about a little bit and share with you is that there indeed is a distance, and always has been, as part of the problem with cinema, that there is a distance that needs to be overcome, akin to philosophy in the Western tradition, between what is real and what is true. And so, just for the record, I do think that the perfect, let me not say the perfect, because I'm starting to convince myself more and more that this may indeed be the perfect iteration. Certainly a beautiful iteration if Wes Anderson would do something like this. But I think the perfect Lord of the Rings film would be made by Terrence Malick.
Yeah, I agree.
I think glimpses of it that we see in a combination of the Thin Red Line and the New World, there's something at work there that Tolkien would indeed love. Now, so yeah, Nicholas, that's me. That's what I'm bringing to the table.
And as I understand, you're going to be this is almost going to be a lecture type presentation, right? So I'm going to be
I'm going to kind of spout off a few things. I should say I had a whole section on Tolkien, so I have written on Tolkien. I'm kind of a low key Tolkien scholar. Like the one thing that I have brought to the kind of Tolkien table is kind of laying the foundation for Tolkien's aesthetics, medieval aesthetics of light, which now I'm in the process of kind of revising, especially since like becoming Orthodox and being like, oh, wait a second, like there's more than just like Saint Bonaventure and like Aquinas. Like,
that's right.
What about Saint Dionysius and the way that this all functions in there, and what is happening in Byzantium? So that is what I am at work on now, hopefully, God willing, with a new book with Kent State University Press.
Oh, cool.
So
that's awesome. Can't wait to read that.
If it emerges,
it must. I'm
must.
sorry, it must.
Okay, so Nicholas, do you just want me to like jump in with some ideas here? Okay,
I'm gonna go right ahead.
There's a PowerPoint that I have with just some images so that I can share with you all, and we'll try to make sure to time box this quickly. But the question at stake here, right, is wondering what a Lord of the Rings film by Wes Anderson might look like, right? And in thinking about that, any presentation on that should tell us something about Tolkien or something new about Tolkien. It should certainly tell us something or educate us on the cinema of Wes Anderson, right, to give us a greater appreciation of him. But first and foremost, it needs to tell us something about the nature of cinema as a mechanical art form.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is the strange thing about cinema as a mechanical art form. So the basic thesis that I kind of pitched to Nicholas was that a film directed by Wes Anderson about the Lord of the Rings would feel something like a combination of Robert Bresson's Lancelot du Lac, which is a film about Sir Lancelot, and Camelot, made in 1974, and Sergei Eisenstein's Alexander Nevsky from 1938. With some elements of the kind of poetic contemplation of the Japanese filmmaker Yasujiro Ozu.
Okay. Reno, by the way, you haven't shared your screen.
Oh no, okay. I'm gonna do that. I'm gonna just give this pitch a dramatic pitch, and then we'll
just making sure.
Yeah,
because I know you academic types sometimes forget about the details.
It's true. No, it's good. That's a good rescue. And also, and I'm laying this out here so that you all can kind of go and investigate this and listen to this. But I think that a Wes Anderson score to his film would probably be entirely dominated by music, or constructed with music from Ottorino Respighi's Ancient Airs and Dances. And idea. Probably with some music from Jean-Baptiste Lully's Prelude to Psyche.
Wow. That's awesome.
And so, and these are particular pieces that when you listen to them, you'll be like, oh, wait a second, like something is at work here beyond merely the glorious and at times resplendent Howard Shore soundtrack. So look, cinema in its very nature is fundamentally mechanical, right? This is the big problem with it. It's a technology, it's a mechanical technology, right? But the miracle of cinema is that it has the possibility in its use to actually think being, okay? And that makes it, at its most exalted, capable of doing the work of philosophy itself. So this whole genre in academics of film philosophy has emerged since the 1950s, essentially. Well, actually the 60s and 70s, but film philosophy, like film does philosophy. So cinema is more than merely just literature plus, right? And that's the first thing that we need to overcome. It's not literature plus. Meaning making in cinema has three principal components, right? There's the search for verisimilitude, right? Which is kind of an exactness of reality or an exact mimicking of what we see as being real. There's narrative. And then, of course, there's composition. So here I'm going to just share here. So let's just talk briefly about verisimilitude. Here we go. All right. And you can see that, Nicholas?
Yep.
Great. Okay. So look, the roots of cinema and moving images as a whole, because I realize like now cinema, there's film that's digital, there's animation, moving images as a whole, right? The roots of it are in the late medieval and early modern optics, okay? And we should note that any talk about optics is actually rooted in the medieval work of Roger Bacon. And Bacon's work is rooted in the Hexameron tradition that goes back to St. Dionysius. So this kind of idea of light being a fundamental part of creation because it emanates from the creator itself is actually at the roots of cinema. Okay. So in the West, there's a growing obsession with a fidelity to reality when it comes to optics. Okay. So philosophically and historically, it's easy to track this. But it's this idea is actually kind of brought together in what's called the Hockney-Falco thesis in this wonderful book called Secret Knowledge, okay, if anyone is interested. Andre Bazin, the film theorist, he also talks about this in his writing, The Ontology of the Photographic Image, right?
Yeah.
But let's just talk about optics for a second. So there is a clear line between this is a camera obscura. So what we're seeing is a scientific kind of study of reproduction of an experiment using a camera obscura to watch an eclipse. Okay, and you see this is 16th century. Leonardo da Vinci actually lays out the plans for the camera obscura well in the Renaissance. But more than just kind of scientific observation, the art community began to kind of utilize the camera obscura in order to bring more fidelity to painting. Okay. And so there's a clear line between these wood cuttings that are showing artists using image exacting devices to a painting like Vermeer, who is giving us a photorealistic painting. This painting here is not simply the skill of an artist, and suddenly artists became more skilled in painting, right? And have surpassed the kind of flat iconographic style, let's just say,
Yeah.
of Byzantine sacred art, right? Of which Giotto, the great Italian painter, who's still a late Byzantine, living in the West, is still kind of mimicking. But this is produced by a camera, essentially, a camera obscura that's used to bring this fidelity. And here we see in a close-up of the classic mirror in the background, Vermeer showing off the depth of image that is being reproduced, that he's able to see. Okay, so this is a photographic image. Now, the difference, however, this is a daguerreotype made by Louis Daguerre in 1838. It's widely regarded as the first photograph of a human being.
Oh, wow.
Okay. And down here in the bottom left of the picture, we see a man getting his shoe shined. Okay. So now, what's different between this image and those paintings is that these are actual photons of reality in 1838 of these human beings that have been, as Andre Bazin says, embalmed like a mummy in time and space. So this image itself is ontological in nature. It has to do with with the being and substance of reality. And this was a game changer in Western civilization. It suddenly opened the eyes of what was possible.
Can I
Okay.
stop you there just for a second?
Yeah,
Because
please.
I think this is a really interesting point. And
Yeah.
it was when I read that essay by Bazin, I mean, like, it was one of the things that just flipped reality for me, and I started to look at a lot of things in a different way. Even though he's talking about things that are kind of that are recognizable to anybody who has studied the history of Western civilization, especially when he's talking about the desire to reach perfect photorealism in representational painting, right?
Yes.
That there's this desire in the West that reached its apex in the Baroque era that we have to represent reality perfectly.
Mhm.
Why? Because he says it's connected to the same impulse that forced Egyptians not only to embalm their dead, but also to create models of their dead in case the mummies were stolen,
Mhm.
which is a really, really weird idea and a really cool idea.
Yeah.
It's a striving towards immortality in some sense, but in a medium that is not ideal for it, right? Because painting throughout Western civilizational history has traditionally been best used to represent the symbolic and the realistic in proper balance, which is
Yes.
that's Bazin's point, right?
Yes.
And that's what makes an icon such a powerful thing, because it's not simply a work of pure um, symbolism. It's
Mhm.
also a realistic representation of a symbolic reality, right? So it's
Yes.
both. It's realism and symbolism in perfect tension and perfect balance. But as soon as you abandon that and you start going towards perfect photorealistic representation in representational painting, that's fine until you get to the point where you can actually represent it in a photograph, and then, as I'm sure you're going to talk about, in the moving photograph. But I wanted to stop there because I think that's a really fascinating idea, and I think I just want people to just kind of think about it outside of the context here, because I don't want us to talk about too much, because it's not what we're talking about. But for me, that idea was like, oh wow, because that really raises questions about what film should be. But
Yes.
let's get there later, right?
No, no, but that's absolutely wonderful, and that is everything. Is how do we make, as Terrence Malick said to me one time about a film about Roberto Rossellini, how do we elicit the smile of life from this mechanical creation?
Yeah.
Right. And this is why this is what separates in many ways the icon from the Western painting.
Mhm.
right? Where the Western painting is an object of scopic possession.
Yes, there's a power element to it. Yes.
Yes. And the icon actually is calling to us or drawing us through it. Filmmakers are going to try to find a way in a similar fashion for similar reasons to make this tool do something similar.
Yeah, that's awesome.
So photographs are going to change the way art, right? Bazin says that art is freed from its realism. And so here are some Muybridge photographic experiments showing sequence. This is not what I had mentioned to you, Nicholas, but these are alternative Muybridge photographic sequences. But here on the right, we see Marcel Duchamp, 1912, nude descending a staircase, right? And Duchamp—
pure symbolism.
Exactly. Duchamp is addressing what he is experiencing, how to make painting do now what the photographic image can do, and with Muybridge, who brought together a sequence of photographic images for the first time to make photographs move. This is not cinema yet, but it's the beginning of stringing this together. We see this in art, okay? So painting is going to leave the room and kind of go on its own journey, so to speak.
A very strange one.
A very strange one. At its heart, cinema forces us to reconcile two things: action, movement, with time. Okay? That means that consciousness, corporeality, space, and time are all central to the thinking power of cinema. Whether we address that or not, it is doing that work. And cinema emerges as an elemental art form. This is what you're sensing, right? It's an elemental art form that speaks to our most basic needs as human beings. So there's an inherent tension, Nicholas, as you said, in cinema, between the sacred and mythic, right? And the ordinary, right? Between spirit and bodies, feeling and action. And the struggle of cinema then is the inherent struggle of the 20th century, but we can even make that more broadly, just of being human, right? The struggle between the poetic and the spiritual, with the prosaic and the scientific. Yeah. Okay. Now, this struggle is at the heart, at the beginning of cinema too. Okay. So the cinema begins with two people, essentially, the Lumiere brothers, whose name, of course, means the brothers of light, and Georges Méliès. Now, listen to Lumiere, and you'll get a sense of what the Lumiere brothers' focus was, right? Somebody wrote Auguste Lumiere because he wanted to get a camera to do work with it. And he said, "Young man, you can be grateful that my invention is not for sale, for it would undoubtedly ruin you. It can be exploited for a certain time as a scientific curiosity to see reality being replicated and to study it. But apart from that, it has no commercial value." Yeah. So it was Méliès, Georges Méliès. Trip to the Moon is his most famous work, right? But Martin Scorsese made a movie based on a book about Méliès. Hugo Cabret was the name of the film. With Lumiere brothers and Méliès, we get this divide that we still sense today. It's conflated, but we get it, right? The Lumiere were focused on the actual. They were focused on locations, to document events, to witness real events, to kind of, the truth of those things was on the surface. And that's the documentary tradition that we feel today. When we watch a documentary, it is of the tradition of the Lumiere brothers. Méliès was fantastical. He shot in studios, right? He told magical stories. The truth is embedded in these stories. We can kind of dig into the stories in some way. Now, the lines are conflated, but the Hollywood system, would kind of principally follow the narrative structure. They would kind of make a combination of these things, right? The Hollywood system would bring a verisimilitude to the structure of film, so that you can get sucked into it and not be confused by spatially by the film, you can get sucked into the film, right? We never think twice when we're watching a film about the door opening and you walk in and you go into the next room, right? But in actuality, those things could be 2,000 miles apart, right? So this kind of structuring of film allows us to believe it with verisimilitude, but it uses narrative to drive the story. So you've got this kind of two things coming together in what we usually think about as a Hollywood film. Now, the other aspect, another aspect of cinema, right? Verisimilitude and narrative, which we just addressed here. So verisimilitude, narrative is composition. Okay, mise en scène is what the French call, and is essentially like how you organize the screen, because how you organize the screen actually conveys information, and we know that from a painting, right? The composition of the painting tells a story. Oh, let me just show something here. So the way that film works, right? On the right here is the Muybridge. This is the first Muybridge, which would kind of captured a horse in motion, essentially to see whether or not a horse's feet actually left the ground when it ran. This was the first time that human beings saw what a horse looked like when it ran. It captured and embalmed this beast and rider in time to do so. Mm-hmm. On the left here, we see this zoopraxiscope, which is basically a little child's device where you draw pictures and you spin it and it appears to move, right? Cinema is the same illusion, right? It's an illusion that tricks the brain into thinking that these still images are actually moving, okay? And it uses the brain. All of cinema is built up itself on illusion. Oh, here, I jumped ahead of myself here. So it's built up on this. Now, there's this whole thing that we could talk about, Zeno's paradox, and the paradox of movement when it comes to action, and the way that philosopher Henri Bergson overcame this paradox with the idea of duration. But essentially, let's just say this. A film is like a musical score. Okay, a musical score is more than the sum total of individual notes, right? Sure. A musical score is this work through duration with some kind of impetus given to it, or
guiding vision.
A guiding vision, yeah. Okay, well, with mise en scène, right? Before we just kind of turn to Wes Anderson, with mise en scène, this is a term in filmmaking to describe how everything is arranged within a scene, okay? For the purpose of kind of creating a mood or meaning. So, for example, let's look at this film by Bresson, Lancelot du Lac, 1974. Bresson uses mise en scène to depict the medieval world of King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table. You have never seen a medieval film done this way.
Yeah.
And on the surface, you might be like, I hate this movie. Because it doesn't conform to our expectations of what a film about King Arthur should look like, and even stories told. Mm-hmm. But given your example, Nicholas, Bresson has something deeper involved. How do you talk about and elicit the spiritual contemplation and concerns of people in armor killing each other? Mm-hmm. How do you show that? Okay, so what Bresson does is that he employs a very minimalistic style in his compositions, carefully arranging scenes to emphasize kind of emotional and spiritual aspects of the story. So in one scene to the left here, this is the round table. It's an austere table. I don't have the shot from the film, but when the knights sit around the table, it's very orderly in a whitewashed room, right? This balance and symmetry in the sparseness of the set, right, reinforces the austerity and spiritual, for Bresson, the spiritual introspection of the characters. He also would use non-professional actors,
Uh-huh.
because he didn't think that actors should act, that it betrays cinema to try to act too realistically. What he wanted was the presence of bodies and faces, who could deliver meaning through lines, but the camera itself, the composition, the editing, and the sound is what is delivering the meaning in this film. Okay. Also through precise framing. So for instance, that Bresson is very interested in hands, that hands as the instruments of human activity become a meditative focus that is, or as you would say, a trope for kind of a cinematic trope, in order to kind of convey a deeper meaning about what action is about to transpire, that the joust is more than simply the clashing of bodies and instrument, or a sword fight is more than simply a blade cutting through someone. It is about that decisive moment when the sword is drawn. What we're going to see here is a foundation for much of what Anderson is doing. Right? Meticulously constructed scenes that live on the surface for the purpose of diving deep into the meaning. Now, this is not what Susan Sontag was talking about. Generally, when we talk about surface as kind of people living in a postmodern age, we think of, we are interpreting that through the kind of the cultural milieu of Susan Sontag's influence, that there is no truth in depth, that all truth lives on surface, right? Which is a rejection of the tradition that we're trying to embrace here. But alternatively, right, that it's here on the surface. Okay. And there's violence, right? There's action, but not in the way that one would anticipate. It kind of undermines our expectations for action.
It's very unpleasant.
It's very unpleasant, in a way that draws our attention to something beyond simply the expectation, or the physical interaction, that there's something more hovering over or deeper in the physical action itself. Okay.
So can we
let's
stop
take a break for a second, and then we'll turn. Yeah.
Okay, so this is really interesting, because it sounds like what you're saying, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds like what you're saying is that what Bresson is trying to do, even in the 70s, before the decadence of digital cinema and 3D filming of a separate planet that people want to live on, and refuse to live on planet Earth because they want to be in Pandora. Even in the 70s and before, in the 50s, when he got started, right? He's trying to use if I'm understanding this correctly, he's trying to use a fully immersive medium, a medium that can, in effect, represent reality in the best way that we've ever been able to. But he's trying to do it in a way to accentuate the symbolic, not the representational.
Yes.
Is that right?
That's exactly right. Because fidelity, verisimilitude, the real, film can do that, like the Lumiere brothers. It can show us the scene of human living, but Bresson is like, but that's not the scene of human living. There's more to that. How do we elicit the more to that? We have to use cinema as cinema in the tools that it offers us to do such, like laying gold leaf on an icon, like exaggerating features on a human body, right?
Right, but he does it not by exaggeration, but by embracing a kind of minimalism, right?
Yes.
Which is very counterintuitive in some ways, but it makes a lot of sense. But realistically speaking, though, I read through about half of his notes on cinematography. There's little excerpts in there that I feel like I should brand on my forehead, because they're so brilliant, and they're very profound. My question, though, is, like, this comes through for the viewer when the viewer has a training in symbolic thinking. But
Yeah.
is it possible for somebody who doesn't have the internal work, hasn't done the internal work that somebody like Bresson has done? How can you bridge that gap? Is it even possible for a person like that to have an inkling of what Bresson is trying to pass on? Because he certainly seems to think so, but I'm not sure.
Yeah. So I think a couple things here, right? And here we can bring in Tarkovsky. Here, I mean, Yasujiro Ozu is completely different because he's working in a context that's completely isolated, but happens to have a similar vocabulary, or well, let's just say lexicon, because he is working outside of kind of Western, the domination of Western philosophical thought and the kind of entertainment machine.
Right.
But for Tarkovsky also, it is the troubling aspect of a film like this, the challenging aspect that they think stirs the soul, that calls the soul, that moves it, that makes it unsettled when it returns back to Fast and the Furious 17. Right? That you feel the absence and longing of that strangeness, and you realize that something is at work there. Now, what we do with the call is different. The communities that we establish and what we kind of demand and ask of each other is certainly essential in that. But I think you're right. I think maybe the best that we can hope for is in what Heidegger calls, and what is central to Wes Anderson's films, is a unheimlich, right? This unhomeliness, or an alienation that we experience from ourselves when we watch it. Now, if we're following the economy of entertainment, that's not going to work, right? Because we can simply judge it as boring.
Yeah,
and that's fine. Like, I mean, there's like, this is not a Netflix and chill kind of endeavor, right?
No.
These are formalized endeavors that are suited for the formality of cinema.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. But so this is, maybe we want to go into this later, but the formality of cinema, you're not the first person to talk about that I've heard talk about this inevitable degradation of the form by reducing it in size to the screen that is directly in front of you, whether that is a computer screen or, worse yet, a phone.
Yeah.
Do you think that we might be on the cusp of actually re-enchanting the film medium with the introduction of a technology like the Apple AR VR headset?
Oh yeah, I do think that a couple of things there. So cinema as a classical art form, in many ways, is going to become historically bracketed, much like an opera, right? I think 100 years from now, going to cinema will be like going to opera.
Yeah. Okay.
It might be a more formal event, and you go and you have this relationship to it. I think
that's okay. And that's okay.
Yeah, and I think that that's okay.
Yeah.
I do think, to answer your question, is yes, that especially with video game technology, like what is it? Red Dead, is that the cowboy video game? And the new Legend of Zelda video games that have these immersive landscapes and a narrative that is mythic and symbolic in quality, with glimmers of what is true. I think the possibilities of the medium to kind of enter into a cinematic space are certainly possible, but it's always ever going to be susceptible, as we might imagine, to these basic issues, right? So these basic truths will not change as it evolves. or devolves. So
Richard, I just have to note Richard's comment. Since all poor people food becomes rich people food, I look forward to theater popcorn being $15 for 7 pieces, carefully arranged in an haute cuisine setting when I put on my tux to go to the cinema.
No, it's good. It's
Uh,
good.
let's move on. But I do want to just say one final thing about this new technology that Apple's coming out with, is that the VR experience of being fully immersed in a mythic world is one thing. What I find really interesting about the new technology that Apple has just begun, and I think is going to go, that a lot of other things are going to go in this direction, is not the fully immersive VR aspect, but the very high def AR reality, where you can actually transpose a large screen onto your field of vision in a way that basically you're manufacturing a theater screen in front of you. So you're not fully immersed in the world. You are creating a screen. You're creating a cinema-sized flat screen on which you can fake project a movie with the same defects that you would have with film. And I think this is actually going to be possible with this technology, and then some people are actually going to want to do this. Especially though this is going to go the way of vinyl, right? This is going to be like the exclusive vinyl thing.
Yes.
People love the sound of vinyl, right? Even though it's not a technology that
it's the surface noise, right?
Right, exactly. So I think there's something that's going to happen where you can have these goggles, and they're going to get cheaper as they get more popularized, where you
would you try it? Would you watch stuff on it?
Yeah, I would. Yeah. A lot of people are freaking out about it in the same way as they're freaking out about AI. But and of course any technology could go the way of the beast. I'm not here to argue that.
Yeah.
But I see that I think this is like the smartphone in terms of its ability to upend the technological space. So it's like it's going to change a lot of things, and I think it's properly used. There could be some really interesting applications for it that aren't going to be that are not going to increase the solipsism that we're existing in now. I think there's ways of using it that are actually going to increase communal usage in a weird way.
Yeah.
But we'll see if that happens, because it all depends on how we use it. If everybody wants to be lost in immersive worlds and will use that thing only for that, then we'll end up in a world of WALL-E. But I do see a world of where we get a bunch of us get together in a basement like this, and we all put on these things, and we're sharing a space, both physically and virtually.
Right.
And we all see the same screen, and it's large, and it has the same effect as a cinema. I'm not sure what that would feel like.
Yeah.
Because part of the joy of cinema, of course, is going into that dark room, is sitting in that seat, is having that smell around you, is being able to look back and shush people as they're tittering to each other, right?
Yeah.
But there's something I think that could be. So I guess what I'm saying is I don't think all is lost.
No, yeah, I tend to agree with you. And two things that makes me think of, right? One is I've had the opportunity to see two of Tarkovsky's films on the big screen. Mm-hmm. They're effortless endeavors on the big screen. I can't make it through Solaris on the couch. Like I'll fall asleep. Right. My family will not be around me when that is on. Yeah. So it is a qualitatively different experience. The other thing too is Tolkien's distinctions here about the flight of the quisling and the escape of the prisoner here is important, because in many ways popcorn cinema, there's a huge argument here or debate about a delight and its similarity or dissimilarity with entertainment. But there is a flight of the quisling aspect in that. Whereas kind of moving into a film like Solaris, which I can only imagine on those, now that kind of gets me kind of pumped up, or Stalker, where you're able to kind of observe the environment together. seems to take on the quality of the escape of the prisoner from this environment. So
cool. I'm glad we're on the same page.
yeah. Okay, so let me just finish here with some thoughts on Anderson. And then maybe we can kind of talk a little bit about Tolkien and why these qualities are of significance. I'm going to share this again. Let's see. I snuck those. Oh, wait a second. That's not what I want to share. I want to share this here. Our PowerPoint. There we go. Yes. Okay, let's return to Anderson now. So Anderson is operating under a similar system. There's two things that work in Anderson's films. Let's buzz through there. There is the idea of loss, loneliness, and alienation, this unheimlich, right? This pathos at work that drives the narratives, balanced with intense ornamentation, okay? And cut through by a sense of violence that usually leads to some new direction emerging. We're woken up from this combination of ornamentation and pathos by extreme violence. Okay, Anderson works with colors, with flat surfaces, with actors who do not emote for the most part, except this guy back here with the glasses, who maybe did not
didn't get the memo.
Did not get the memo, right? But there is a withdrawing from the surface level emotions. Lines are delivered still with a sense of sobriety. Characters may seem disaffected, but that's not necessarily the case. They're feeling intensely, but the camera is doing the work of what traditionally we might think an actor is to deliver. Okay. Now, these colors, first of all, let me say this is one of the big beefs, and I've written about this when it comes to Tolkien, right? We know from his own artwork that his vision of Middle Earth was intensely bright and colored. And this is intense. This is tied directly to the medieval aesthetics of light. The medieval age and the late classical age was an intensely brightly colored reality, right?
Yeah, not medieval grunge. That never existed.
Not medieval grunge. I love the drawings of John Howe, not so much Alan Lee, God bless them, but
Same
that
here.
aesthetic thing, what we know from Tolkien, right, is that he loved core blocks illustrations, right? This is what Tolkien sees. This is a very Wes Anderson image in many ways, with the palette and the flatness and the seemingly strangeness. He loved Pauline Baynes, right? These intense colors and brightness. This is Smith of Wootton Major, which is a minor masterpiece. If only we could see illustrations for The Lord of the Rings by her, but I'm sure it would look very similar. Okay. Also, so with the ornamentation, objects tell stories. Objects carry intense meaning in Anderson's film, in his films. Now, this is interesting because the combination of deadpan acting and objects that speak is very similar to what Tom Shippey said about, wrote about Tolkien's characters. He said, Tolkien's characters speak like maps, right?
Yeah.
There is a quality beyond just conveying the kind of psychology of a character or the meaning of a story. There are characters who are embedded and entrenched in the large history and myth that they are dwelling in. And the same thing happens with objects in Anderson's films. And the objects are allowed to speak because the characters are so flat, right? They tell a story beyond such, rather than the psychological kind of Freudian drama of the ring in Jackson's films, or the shards of Narsil, which are approached. I'm not even sure if there's kind of good kind of way to discuss that. They're not allowed to speak for themselves, which we know that in myth, these items do speak on their own, right? They do have a story to tell. Now, this is very similar to the work of Yasujiro Ozu. This is from, I think this is from, well, I'm not sure the exact film. As you'll see, they're very similar. With Ozu, objects speak and are allowed to speak. And this is similar to what Anderson is working with here. And similarly, as we were kind of noticing with Bresson, they speak. The Japanese call this aesthetic mono no aware, right? This is part of the wabi-sabi aesthetic. Mm-hmm. But essentially, mono no aware is the pathos of being, okay? That there is, there is a balance between, it's not a psychologicalized sentimentality or nostalgia, mm-hmm. but as Tarkovsky would call it, nostalgia, right? A longing for a homeland that has been lost. And this is the most famous shot for Ozu from Tokyo Story, not Tokyo Story. Well, we won't even worry about that too. But that these objects speak to us and carry meaning in a way that prevents us from being able to embrace sentimentality, mm-hmm. And our own kind of catharsis. We're allowed to kind of distance ourselves and to think beyond the physicality into a realm that we weren't even aware that we could tap into.
Yeah. And then, of course, iconography.
Exactly. So this is the argument being made here. So finally, there's violence in Anderson's films that I think Tolkien would appreciate as well. The interruption of violence. So we have longing and memory. We have objects speaking, and we have emotionality kind of being interrupted for a larger meaning that is beyond and bound by time and space. And then, of course, violence, which interrupts these spaces, which is surprising that most people forget about in Anderson's films. Mm-hmm. That bring meaning to the pathos, or an awakening from a slumber that one seems to be caught in because of this alienation, and lulled into the speak and the talk of objects in the world, and we're called beyond to some kind of higher meaning beyond what the narrative can give us itself, right? The narrative may want to tell a story about a father dying, such as and brothers reuniting, as in the Darjeeling Limited, or a family reconciling its trauma, right? These things could be psychological in nature and could affect us in that way, and we could treat it in that way, or it could call us to kind of some higher meaning itself. Now, whether or not Anderson is intending on some higher meaning, it's irrelevant.
Okay.
Would he do that for the Lord of the Rings in a way that Peter Jackson can only create a space for maybe a saccharine sentimentality 20 years later? Yes. Okay, Nicholas, that was long-winded, but I thank you for the space. Actually, it wasn't too horrible.
No, not at all. I thought it was quite compact, actually.
Good.
Okay, well, I'm going to let everybody in right now. But for those of you who are not in the Patreon community, as you may or may not know, we have these conversations occasionally with very interesting people. As you see, this is not something you will normally find on your normal YouTube scroll, but we also have a section of it that is a exclusive question and answer session that will not show up on your YouTube scrolling. So if you want to have that part of the conversation, please join my Patreon community. That's www.patreon.com/NicholasKotar. And we have these fairly occasionally, and we're going to have some more with some very interesting people. So come on and join us. And yeah, that's that.